In this video, we're gonna look at navigation component that Jetpack Compose provides us. I'm gonna also show you how to set up and use navigation component with your Android apps. This video serves as a basic intro to the navigation component. With that out of the way, let's just get started. Okay, first, what does navigation mean? When you move between different screens within your app, you are navigating between them. I will use YouTube website as an analogy. In the YouTube website, you can see buttons for home, screens, subscriptions, and more. When you click on these buttons, it takes you to a different screen. Also notice that the URL changes to reflect the current screen. These screens serve different purposes. For example, home screen displays the feed, shorts displays the shorts, and so on. And also notice how the names used in the buttons give the user a hint as to what screen each button will display when they click on them. One of the interesting features of website is how they can keep track of the screens user visits and how you can quickly go back to the previous screen. Navigation component provides us these functionalities in Android. Let's now look at Google Play Store. It has similar pattern to what we saw with YouTube. It also displays button to navigate quickly within the app. Instead of displaying the buttons on the left side of the screen, it now displays at the bottom. Clicking these buttons changes the screen as expected, and pressing the back button brings us to the previous screen we visited. Also, one more thing, you can have the same effect as navigation component by conditionally rendering. These type of patterns are used in modern websites, as modern websites are mostly single page applications. Before we get started, there are a couple of terms we need to be familiar with. First, destination. These are screens user can visit within your app. Each destination is associated with a unique route, and these routes are mapped to screens or composables. We can create all the possible destinations that user can visit with the help of NavGraph Builder. To go back to the website analogy, think of these routes as URLs. Navigation component makes it easy to display screens just with the routes. One of the feature navigation component provides us is a way to keep track of destinations user visits, which websites already have implemented. Navigation component does this with the help of backstack. Navigation component also requires us to have a fixed start destination, so it can display it when a user opens your app for the first time. And this destination is added to the backstack initially, and then more destinations are added to the backstack as the user continues to move to different destinations within your app. I'd like to think backstack as an array, for which you can add destination and remove them. Nav component can then display the last element in the array. Backstack also provides us functionalities such as displaying the current destination the user is on and all the previous screens they have visited. As you can tell, navigation components makes it easy to display apps with multiple screens and navigating between them. By default, navigation component neatly fits into Android system navigation. User can go back to the previous screen by pressing the back button on the system nav at the bottom of the screen, or they can use the gesture to go back. If we are gonna add a navigation component to our app, we need to be familiar with two functions. One is nav controller, another is NavHost. You can get the nav controller by using remember nav controller function. Nav controller as a navigate method, you can use this to move to different routes. We will see that in a bit. Now let's look at NavHost. NavHost is a type of composable. It passes the constraints you pass as modifiers to its children. Its children are actually a type of nav graph builders. NavHost requires nav controller and start destination as parameters. Okay, now I'm gonna build a simple app that showcases the features of navigation component. This app will have a card that displays what the screen the user is on and 2 buttons to go back and forward. I will also add an arrow at the top of the screen to allow the user to quickly go back to the previous screen as well. Adding an arrow at the top of the screen to go back is a pretty common UI pattern in most apps. I'm gonna go ahead and create an empty activity. I'm gonna also remove all the boilerplate code Android Studio has generated, including the scaffold. We're gonna build that in a bit. I'm gonna create a navigation demo app function. Okay, so to actually use a navigation component in our app, we need nav controller and NavHost. We can get the nav controller by calling the remember nav controller. So when we actually type it, we get a pop-up saying add a dependency on an Android X navigation compose, whatever. So we're gonna click this, and we get the Gradle project sync in progress. Now we're gonna get the NavHost. You can get the NavHost by typing in NavHost and selecting the something from here, I guess. For the nav controller, we're gonna pass in the nav controller we created by using the remember nav controller. For the task start destination, we need to provide a route. Currently we don't have any routes. We can create these routes inside of NavHost. We're gonna see that in a bit. For now, I'm gonna leave it as I'm gonna pass empty string. And you can additionally pass a modifier. This modifier passes the constraints you set it to its children. The NavHost children are actually a type of nav graph builders. Okay, let's go. Now I'm gonna create a enum class to represent all the routes. Without this, we might make a typo when we pass route names to nav controller later. I'm just gonna call the routes screen 1, screen 2, screen 3. Now that we have the enum class and routes, I'm representing routes as just strings. Now you can use the values inside of the enum class. if it access the name properties of enum classes, you actually get a string representation. So the screen 1 is gonna have the string representation of screen 1. If we use it like this, it's gonna be just an enum object. Let's create a composable for this root. Okay, so I have created a composable. I'm not gonna go how it looks like. So let's set it as a initial screen the user sees. Inside of NavHost, we can create we can invoke functions called composable to actually create nav graphs. I know composables, right? This might lead to some confusion because we use the same name to denote functions or custom Jetpack composables. For the root, we're gonna pass the screen 1. This composable has two parameters. One is root and the other is content. Since the last parameter is content and it accepts a function, like most functions in Jetpack Compose, we can use the trailing lambda syntax. So now if we run it, we should be able to see the screen I have created. The screen I have created is just a card and 2 buttons, and I have commented out the outlined button. So I'm using a column and a card and a spacer and row. Inside of rows I have 2 buttons, and I have some modifiers for the card component, and I'm aligning it. You can pretty easily create it on your own. I need to create 3 of these. For the second screen, I'm gonna uncomment the outlined buttons. For the third screen, I'm gonna create a button with a text done. So now we have 3 roots, 3 screens, I mean. We need to map these screens to roots. Just like we did with this screen 1, we're gonna do the same thing to the other 2 screens I created. Okay, now that we created a nav graph or whatever that maps to different screens, we're going to use the nav controller's navigate method and pass in the route we want to visit, and it takes to that screen. Pretty simple, right? I'm going to use the next and previous buttons to move between screens. In the documentation, they don't recommend passing the nav controller to the individual screens. Instead, they recommend what should happen when an action happens. For example, a button is clicked. we will pass a function that calls navigate method of nav controller when the button is clicked. So our screen expects a function. So I'm going to pass that argument I have created here, and I'm going to run it. I'm going to invoke it. So now I need to pass a function to that parameter. We can use the navigate method of nav controller, and we need to pass a root name. So I'm going to pass in the this root name, screen2 root. So I'm going to do the same thing for all the buttons for these composables. Screen 2 has a previous button, so we need to handle that as well. We now need to define all these parameters inside of actual screens. Make sure you use the functions defined in the composable and the actual buttons. I'm going to use the on click. Next button is clicked. I'm going to run it. On previous, we're going to use on previous button is clicked. Actually invoke it. And here we're going to use the on done button is clicked. Let's run it and see what happens. Clicking the done button takes us back to the initial screen. So that's how I set up the rows. Now we're gonna look at some useful methods Backstack provides us. You can get the backstack by using the navcontroller.current backstack entry as state. So if you get a pop-up, import whatever. Now that we have that, we can get the current route the user is on by using this line. This is useful when you want to display the screen at the top of your screen. We're gonna do that now. Let's create a scaffold composable. So if you hover over the scaffold, it displays all the parameters it accepts. You can see it accepts the top bar, content, bottom bar, all this. So we're gonna use the top bar parameter. For that, I'm gonna pass in top app bar composable. This scaffold provides inner padding value to the content. So we're gonna use that inner padding. So we're gonna copy all the NavHost inside of this scaffold content. And pass the inner padding to the NavHost's padding. Okay, so if we hover over the top app bar, we get this opt-in for experimental material 3 API. We're going to click on that. Inside this title parameter, I'm going to create an arrow icon and text that displays the name of the current route. Okay, in the title parameter of this top bar, you can pass a composable. You can display inside this top app bar. Right, so I'm going to use a row. I'm going to use icon button. Inside of the icon button, I'm going to create a icon as an image vector and content description parameters. For the image vector, I'm going to use icons. I'm going to find a arrow icon. And you need to pass a content description for this to work. For now, I'm going to use a null. Next, we're going to create text. Inside of the text, I'm going to just use test. Inside of this test, I want to display the current route. Okay, remove this part. In the text, I'm going to use the current route. So if we hover over it, we get a surround with null check. We're going to click on it. I'm going to also add colors for the top app bar. I copied all these values from the sample example for the top app bar component. So let's try running it. So now we get this. So if we click on the next buttons, this displays the current screens. In the initial screen, I don't want to display the arrow icon since there is nowhere to go back. We can conditionally render the arrow icon depending on the state of the backstack. Recall that backstack keeps the track of routes user has visited. NavController has a method called previous backstack entry. Previous backstack entry provides a reference to the previous destination user has visited before the current screen in the navigation stack. We can check if there is a screen we can go back with previous backstack entry. Then we could use a navigator up to actually go back. If there is no previous screen, then previous backstack entry just returns null. NavController also provides us a navigate up method. With that, we can go back to the previous screen user has visited. I'm going to use that on the onClick method of icon button. So I'm going to use this expression. Okay, if you didn't know what this operator is, this is a comparison operator. There are a bunch of them. I'm not going to cover them, but this one compares if the left side is not equal to the right side. So if the previous backstack entry is null, then this expression returns false. If it's not null, then it returns true. I'm going to use this variable in a if statement to conditionally render the icon. I'm going to put this in the if block. Let's try running it. So we now don't see the arrow icon. We can see the arrow icon for the next screens. Okay, so our app looks ugly as hell. Let's try making the root name different. So let's go to the enum class and let's say all our enum classes have a title. So we can do that by calling val string, and we can pass individual enum classes titles. Since it's the only property, we can just omit the named parameter. Now we're gonna just use the title wherever we use the screen dot name. Let's add a modifier to the row. gonna go ahead and turn on the system bars for this app. Okay, so let's test the system navigation. Pressing the next button. So if I want to go to the previous screen, I can press the back button. Now that's working. Also, I use the navigate up method for this. Unclick event handler. We could use that for the previous as well. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. I'll see you in the next video. I am planning on completing the beginner course you can find in the developer.android website. I'm sure they do a better job explaining things, but I wanted to cover the same thing and possibly provide guidance when you get stuck with a bug. Please like and subscribe. That would help the channel out a lot, and see ya.